Hi, I'm here, just so you all know.
Hi, Andy, I'm here. Oh, hey, Michael.
Andy, we're muted until we start in a few minutes, but thanks for letting us know you're here.
Great.
And it is just for the providers shortfall, the remaining gap of one.
I'm all about the backlight. I like
Where
the
was that?
backlight.
The boundary.
Oh.
But I remember the first couple times I went into the founders met. More interesting. And
Mode, yes. Hello. Right. We ready to get things kicked off?
Yes, we are standing by and ready. I think Andy's on the call as well.
Okay. Well, great. We will kick off our workshop for today, Grand County Early Childhood Education and Grandkids St. Louis Landing Expansion. Yeah, heard it. Yeah, it's true.
Thank you all for coming today. We're going to start with Epic doing a presentation on the Grand County Child Care Strategy. They've been working with Grand Beginnings and Katie Hale over the last couple months. Katie was able to get a grant from the Buell Foundation to do this work, to try to come up with data and numbers to see exactly where early childhood education was at in Grand County, and what those gaps actually were in terms of, and we wanted to support our centers, what that would require, and to come up with kind of some long-term strategy recommendations for doing so. So I know everybody here cares greatly about early childhood education and supporting our local families. Not only is it a benefit to our smallest community members who are being served by these facilities, but it also allows our families to be in the workforce and support economic development for our communities as well. So with that, I will hand it over to Andy and Alethea from Epic, who are online to do the first part of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear
I
me okay?
apologize, and Katie. You guys are all good. Online, Andy and Alethea, just let me know when you want me to change the slide, all right?
Sounds good. I'm going to cover slides 3 and 6. So we will be skipping around just a little bit today, everyone, to make the most efficient use of our time. Thanks again for having us to review the culmination of this project and everyone who's participated thus far. Feel free to pop forward to slide 3, Katie. So just a very quick reminder for those of you that may not be as familiar with what brought us here and what we hope to achieve. As many of you know, childcare is a unique and significant challenge in the county, as it is in many places, both when we consider the stability of the childcare business model and other barriers that exist that make it difficult for childcare to exist and truly thrive across Grand County. So a huge part of this interaction and project was to develop a shared understanding amongst key decision-making parties, as well as community leaders across the board in the county, of what are the biggest priorities relative to childcare, what are the opportunities to address those priorities, and how can we summarize that in an investment strategy in a way that this group can carry forward towards something both collaborative and actionable to address that in the near and far future. So you can see some of those indicators of success of our work together, and we certainly feel great about the work that's been done to date and really appreciate everyone's participation. But we are just putting the final touches on an investment summary, as well as contemplating what the future of this work might look like. Feel free to pop forward to slide 6, Katie.
One more.
just one more. There we go. So a reminder of the priorities that were identified by the community participants that were engaged during this process. Those were increasing sector pay, reducing tuition for families, stabilizing and supporting the financials of providers, and then investing in capacity, either in motion or upcoming, right, in order to meet the demands and needs of the community. And so I'll turn it over to Andy to talk a little bit more about what we explored in each one of those priorities and the data outcomes.
Thanks, Alethea and Katie. We can go to page 7. We skipped through some of these pages, but I think one of the important things that I would like to note is across the county, there really is a unified commitment to addressing childcare and building a sustainable childcare system. And that system is to support families and, as Sarah mentioned, our youngest community members, our children, but also focused on strengthening the workforce and fueling economic growth. And that was just a really wonderful thing to see as part of the research, is this unified commitment to creating that sustainable childcare system. There is one area that there was not clear alignment on, and you'll see when we get to our recommendations, and that was really around tuition. And there are both proponents of reducing tuition for families, as well as increasing tuition to really stabilize some of the business model. And we just wanted to speak for a few minutes about sort of stabilizing the front end and our providers versus tuition support for families. And we believe that if we are focused on the front end and really stabilizing our providers and their financial sustainability, we are addressing a lot of the root causes of the systemic challenges. We're supporting the sector more broadly, which also supports families. And it also creates standard guidelines for the use of funds that providers are receiving, and allows for oversight of the county, of towns, of others, to really oversee how those funds are used and within each provider. There is also a need to support tuition for families. And there is a program to support tuition for families in the county. If we were to fully fill the gap, the financial gap, for the providers with tuition, it would require an increase of 50 to 85% for families, in order to cover the gap in financials that our providers are seeing. It's also decentralizing the funding, and reduces the oversight, therefore, of the county and towns and others who are contributing. And I think one important thing, especially in Grand County, is it requires families to share personal protected information and also opt into scholarships. And Katie, I think we can move on to the next page, which shares a little bit of this in numbers. So currently today, tuition is between 13 and 16% of the average household income in the county. The federal benchmark, or goal, I should say, is that families spend 7% of their household income on childcare. And what we are seeing today is between 13 and 16% per child, in order for families to pay for their children to go to childcare. The box on the bottom of this page is showing grandkids specific tuition, which, as you all know better than I do, of course, is in Fraser. The table at the top is averages across the county. The bottom is grandkids specific. So grandkids is a little bit higher. So we're looking at 19 to 22% of the average household income that families are required to pay for one child. If we were to increase Again, as I mentioned, increased tuition to cover the financial gap that exists. Families would be looking at anywhere from 20 to 30% of the average household income, again, for one child to cover the cost of their tuition. Families, we are already seeing in the county, some families who get to the top of the wait list are opting out due to the cost already. And families are also opting to not apply for scholarships. And again, don't have all the reasons why, but potentially part of this is the requirement to share all of that personal protected information. And we are putting more burden on those families who are unable to pay to share their information. And those families are also those that really want to and need to be out in the workforce. So it's just a little bit more information about tuition and increasing the cost of tuition. Katie, if you want to move to the next page, given some of the, or really the lack of alignment in the question around tuition, our recommendation is that we focus on 3 of the 4 areas that the community identified for investment. And that is increasing the sector pay, increasing pay for those who work in the sector, really stabilizing our providers and ensuring that their financials are such that they are in a position to keep their doors open and serve as many families as possible. And lastly, there's also a need for additional capacity. Again, some of this information is in the document, but the Grand County as a whole has roughly 230 slots and needs roughly 230 slots additionally to serve all the families who need them. Katie, if you want to move to the next page, I'm going to start speaking faster because I'm looking at the clock and we only have a couple of minutes left, but increasing sector pay really allows for providers to offer higher quality, more reliable care. The reality today in the county is that the pay is not high enough for those that work in the system to many of them cannot manage with one job. They have to have multiple jobs in order to sustain themselves, and this causes burnout. This requires them, to be shuffling 2 or 3 jobs, and the staff is often unable and inconsistent to come into centers every day. So increasing that wage allows these providers to have higher quality and more reliable care. It facilitates the continuum of care, which is a really important aspect of quality for childcare when you have the same teachers, the same people day over day, and really reduces turnover for educators and the overall cost for providers when they have consistent workers that are able to come in every day. Also, it allows for increased workforce participation outside of providers as we are able to provide more consistent pay. One of the important things to note is there are licensed slots and classrooms in the county that are currently not being utilized because providers are not able to keep enough staff on board. And so increasing pay allows for those slots that already exist to be utilized without having to increase any capacity in the system. So Katie, moving on to the next slide. To orient you to this page, the blue bars are the amount of revenue that providers bring in for each age of child. The green bar, this is countywide, the green bar is what it costs. So there is a pretty significant gap between revenue and tuition revenue specifically and the cost of providing care. The remaining gap total across the county is about 1.8 million. Roughly half of that is being provided through local philanthropic grants The rest of that is from other larger out-of-county funders as well as in-kind donations. Moving on to, let's go on to page 14, Katie. This is a quick summary of the expected impact if these investments were to be made. There are a lot of different organizations out there that are looking at the impact of investing in childcare. What we used is from the Bipartisan Policy Center. The specific reason we used it is because they have done research across multiple different states and at the county level, and they had Grand County specific numbers. And all of the people looking at this are looking at very similar things. What is the impact to a family? What is the impact to businesses? And what is the impact to tax revenues? And those are the three buckets that are included in these estimates. And while the cost of the investment is very large, the impact is also very large. So we're looking at a cost of roughly $4 million a year and an estimated impact of almost 9, which gives you a pretty strong ROI. We will quickly go into some of the how of this. So Alethea, I'll turn it back over to you for page 15.
Thanks, Andy. So in order to generate that investment, and certainly when we consider the opportunity and the goal of creating a collaborative investment strategy that's county-wide, the recommendation that we're making after talking with all of you and evaluating the data is pursuing a early childhood solutions fund, right? Which sort of walks and talks like an endowment. Feel free to go to the next slide, Katie. But is a way to both create short and long-term impact with an ultimate goal of self-sustainability. And so it does require dedicated fundraising, right? Both in the short and the long term. We've talked about the breakdown of that, and Andy will review that again in a moment. We think this is possible, right? Based on some of the conversations we've had already in the community, as well as the external interest in this type of fund emerging in Colorado. There's also a strategy in lay that would grow capital and generate investment over time, which would help to bolster long-term and secured financial support to go into this system and industry in Grand County, which ultimately together would create a path to true independence potentially, right, in this county for this industry. And we've already talked about the many ways that it affects the county, both from a mathematical perspective and just the everyday experience of residents in the community. And so moving to the next slide, we'll let Andy take on just a little bit of that composition, and then we'll go to all of you for questions.
Thanks, Alethea. So the aspiration is to raise 50 million over 10 years. I know this is a very large number, and I also believe it is attainable. And anywhere you get along that path also makes a meaningful difference, right? So we believe that this number sets the childcare system up for success indefinitely for many generations into the future. And any amount that you raise up to this will also provide meaningful support to the system in the county in the near term, in the medium term, and in the long term. Breaking this down evenly between public, private, and philanthropy, it's roughly 17 million each, or 1.7 million per year for each of those entities, again, just for 10 years. And while these numbers seem large, I also think they're manageable. So I believe there are 7 towns plus the county, plus there are 1A funds. So from a public perspective, again, I know it is not easy. I know there are lots of other infrastructure investments that are required to be made. And setting up a fund like this for childcare allows for reducing and eliminating the need for public funds over time, which in my mind is one of the most important things, that this is really, 10 years feels like a long time, but this is really startup funding to enable this important system to function over time without coming back for public funds indefinitely year over year. Just quickly touching on the next page, Katie, how systems, what the system will invest in. There is still a lot of work to be done. The governance structure is really, really important, and getting that right is a critical next step to ensure that there's a proper governing and oversight body that sets the framework for how funds are distributed and being used across the childcare system in the county. And of course, focused on what the community has said is most important: increasing pay for those who work in the system in the county, stabilizing our providers so that they are able to provide that high quality care for children so that their parents, their caregivers can be out in the workforce and part of the economy. And of course, finally, investing in that capacity as well. So there is a lot more information in this document, and as Alethea mentioned, a very long report also coming out that goes into a lot more detail. But we are also already a little bit over, so we'll pause for questions.
I might be jumping ahead, but I'm curious, I know it would take a while, but can we create a special district and go to the taxpayers for a small mill levy increase to fund it? Is that possible?
All indications from election day yesterday say yes, right? As the first early childhood special district was just officially created by voters on the western slope, and that's the first of its kind here in Colorado. That was a 0.25% sales tax increase, which excluded common everyday goods in that sales tax increase across 3 counties, Eagle, Pitkin, Southwest Eagle, Pitkin, and Garfield counties. That's estimated to generate between $10 and $12 million annually, to go to 3 different purposes, which use different wordings, but is essentially items 1 through 3 that you see on your screen here. And so there's certainly the potential for that. Your voters have shown that they are willing to support, certain tax measures that go to services like this. And so I think, with the right support, that's certainly something that could be explored.
And I just want to add a comment there. Is we talked a lot about potential ballot measures with mixed input and feedback for sure. And the early or the current read, I would say, on the community was absolutely this is an option, but probably not today, given some of the other ballot initiatives in the county. So
Right.
I just wanted to add that piece too. We certainly talked a lot about it, and a strong sentiment that maybe not today in the short term is not the right time. I'm not saying that's the right answer. That's just the sentiment that we heard as we were talking to folks.
Okay, got it. All right, so I understand that there's a need right now. I totally get that we need to make it, but I think it would, if the climate is good, maybe worth going to voters to see either on property tax or on sales tax. Anyway, I'll just
Absolutely.
throw that out there for the future.
Yep,
Thank you.
that's an opportunity, potential full allocation of the lodging tax dollars. There's definitely ways to think about different levers on the public funding side to help contribute to this. It's just not something we fully laid out, as Andy mentioned, based on community feedback.
Yeah, sorry to add more to your plate, but
No, that's okay.
okay, thank you.
All comments welcome.
So breaking down the numbers, 50 million over 10 years. The centers you mentioned earlier in the report, the centers need $1.7 million more right now per year. So
And that's per entity.
No,
Is that what
that's
No, that's
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
countywide.
that's
Total.
countywide,
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
So assuming that you're using that 1.7 1.7 of the money over the 10 years per year. You're looking at $34 million remaining in reserves at the end of that 10 years. Just so happens that 5% of 34 million is $1.7 million. So you could obviously make that kind of return on $34 million, but costs are going to go up. So yes,
Look,
this sets us up for maybe 20 years, but I don't think it's something that's going to work forever. So what do we do to supplement if we actually can raise the 50 million? Yeah, how are we going to still bridge a gap at the end of the day?
Hmm. I would say, as far as planning for future increases, there's certainly ways to demonstrate mathematically, right? If costs increased significantly in any of the areas being mitigated currently, like if wages increased a significant amount over that term or the next 30 years or something altered drastically, that math could be done and contemplated. I think probably the most direct way to mitigate that would be to, increase those contributions, renew them, or contemplate what that might mean in the medium and longer term. The other thing to note here is that for the childcare business model, if the real estate they're operating in is free, right? And there's a wage schedule that's contemplated over those 2 decades and a cost of living schedule that's contemplated over those first 2 decades. There's a way to see also foreseeably how that might increase over time. But what we've seen over the last, decade or so tells us that maybe those increases won't be significant enough that, that fund would be totally depleted, especially if some of those costs in the business model are mitigated at the front end. Andy, do you have other thoughts on that should be shared?
I think most important for me is this is starting to set your system up in a way that they are much more flexible and sustainable, and some of their costs, as I mentioned, with hiring will also go down. That's not going to completely it's not going to go down that much. I agree, your costs are going to go up, but this sets you up in a way that in every single provider, I believe, in a way that is much more successful than they are today. And they will continue to be scrappy and learn and figure out how to make this work. And it will be so much easier for them.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we have very good people running the daycares and the early childhood care facilities currently, and they've been very scrappy for a very long time. Um, I guess what I'm interested is, and we had those two ballot measures on the ballot yesterday, 2 days ago, that basically people said, let the wealthy pay more and let's get free lunches for kids. Obviously, there's an appetite for those kind of ballot issues. I think we set the cost of care higher, and if you want a reduction, then you have to go through the same things that you would if you had affordable housing, show your tax returns or whatever the scenario is. The bottom line, like Ashley is applying for grants all the time, spending so much time on that kind of stuff, and her staff, those people, or you could hire somebody different, whatever, but to go through the financials of the people that are applying for discounts on daily care, and that could bridge the gap that I think we're going to find ourselves in.
Oh.
I understand what you're saying, and my concern is if you have to raise tuition by 50 to 85% for each family, you're suddenly going to lose all your families. I mean, that the amount required is so significant that I don't think your wealthy families will opt into that. They'll go for a different solution. So I understand that concept, and I think it might have to be a balance or a little bit of both. I don't believe that if we can raise tuition to a level that will actually cover the costs or the needs of the system. Alethea, you look like you might have something to add to that.
Not necessarily that's different from your commentary. We absolutely appreciate, right, the sort of instant impact on the bottom line that raising tuition has, right, when you are creating a pro forma for a solution. But the data experientially shows us that unfortunately, when that happens, especially in towns of this size and communities that are composed like this, you end up causing more financial harm than gain in the short and the long term. Folks that are wealthier tend to defer to private care, or you eliminate a significant amount of the population that may be the folks that need the most access to that care. And so it's certainly something that can be explored and thought about. Epic would never say, don't think about raising tuition. But we do find that the mathematics and the data don't align as well as we would want them to. Otherwise, that would be, of course, the most direct solution, right? In any business, raise the price of your product in a high demand market in order to sufficiently support the increased costs of your business. But in the market that childcare is serving parents and families, they leave the workforce and pull their children out of childcare. And so what we do appreciate is the local sentiment. All of you know each other. You're having these conversations. You envision families in your mind, right? When you think of the folks that can afford that increased tuition. But we would caution you to look closely at the impact potentially on the community of doing that before you implement it.
I don't know if he was suggesting that that was the absolute answer.
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, 50 to 85% tuition raise sounds ludicrous to me. I just think that it should be a tool in the toolbox. I've also
Absolutely.
heard other ideas of maybe having a weekend childcare or daycare that is higher priced because we have an influx of community that is
Absolutely.
that ski community is a wealthier community that comes up and is looking for those services. So I think
Yes.
there's a lot of ideas that it could be incorporated
Yes.
in addition. And again, I just think that suggestion was a tool, not absolute solution.
It's absolutely a tool, right? And one that makes sense when you're trying to mitigate a large deficit, right, in the bottom line. And we didn't have the time or the scope, right, in this initial phase of work to contemplate all the potential scenarios. What we wanted to make sure we were rooted in is what are the most important and most meaningful places to invest to ensure stability in the short and the long term. And so really appreciate those continued suggestions, and we're certainly not advising against exploring that.
And I do want to commend you guys. I've been attending your presentations, and I think focusing on those first three was the right approach. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Andy, one quick clarifying question. The $1.8 million gap between the total cost of care and the revenues per year, does that include increased pay to living wages, or that's with current pay?
That's current pay. Oh, sorry, Andy, go
Yep.
ahead.
It's current pay.
Okay,
Hmm.
so that number does become
low.
significantly larger if you are raising wages to a living wage.
The wages is about 500,000 as well, or in addition.
Okay, so about 2.3 million gap if we're looking at living wages.
25%
Thank you.
increase.
I'd be very interested to know what research is done on that tipping point, how much can you raise tuition before people start finding other solutions?
Cost of private care.
Yeah, speak.
Yep.
Yeah,
It's
I'm like,
it's right
I-
it's right at that above 20% threshold, right? So we demonstrated on the previous screen that 20 to 30% um, amount of household income that tuition would likely be with those 50 to 85% increases. And that's right in the range where we see folks pull out of that market. Obviously, if I make $1,000 in a month and have to give 300 of that to childcare, that's a big impact on my family, right? And so we see folks there at the break-even point of their salaries is what really ends up happening, right? And then one of those caregivers ends up staying home, then they're out of the workforce. We often find that those folks are educated, right, able-bodied, and wanting to be in the workforce, but are not able to because they're making a decision. We certainly, saw that during the pandemic, in the wake of the pandemic, and a lot of the mentality around that balance has shifted. And so it's in some cases a moving target on data, but that is probably the most consistent figure across the board that we can look at. Already right now in Colorado, your average single parent is paying close to that, if not above that market rate, right? Like up to 45% of their income. So it's definitely a strain that causes some tough decisions.
Wow.
So at this point, I'll just say hi, Ashley Bobo. You guys all know me, the executive director of Grandkids. Hit my 20-year anniversary with
Yay.
Grandkids this summer. But just to speak on that, on what I'm seeing right now, we have our typical transitions every fall. This fall, or summer leading into fall openings, we offered 5 children's slots and they turned them down due to tuition rates and not being affordable enough, or scholarship opportunities not being secure and long-term enough for them to feel like they could enter into the workforce and go back to work. So they chose to keep piecemealing it between themselves, grandparents, family, friends, and not take slots. So, and that is from Fraser to Granby, from infant through pre-K. So that's just,
So all of the centers,
Thanks,
there were
Ashley.
5 that were not filled because of costs.
so they
Turn
they,
down this.
they turned down the slots after being on the wait list for over a year
Yeah.
plus.
Yeah.
So,
And I will say our childcare resource and referral data for the last 20 years, for our lowest wage earners, we have been there for a long time already. They already view our current tuition rates as inaccessible. And there's a large sector of the lower and working wage population that is basically in the informal care and possibly low quality care because they already view this as inaccessible. So to some extent, we are already there.
And your grandkids' current tuition costs, that's based on one child, right? So if it's 22% for its an income, it's 44% if you got 2 kids.
and
Yes,
we have
ma'am.
some with 3 kids in the program.
Yeah.
So.
Hey.
Can I ask, why is it required to share personal information when you're getting that scholarship? It's tax requirement?
Well, if we want to income verify,
Okay.
then how else are we going to do it without tax
Sure.
information, pay stubs? So.
And there's people that just don't want to.
So
Withhold.
we have a combination. We just had our most recent scholarship cycle apply in September for awards in October. One family said, we are 2 years behind on our taxes because we started a business and we just don't have anything accurate to give you. So we can't, and then we have other families that are like, husband and I split time. We missed the deadline because we could not get our stuff together because we are opposite passing ships. So, but others are just like, absolutely not. You're not seeing one thing from me personally.
I think to that extent, there is definitely that sentiment among some populations. The other side of that is the administrative burden that you will add on to, and that is incurring additional costs for providers. So we're now talking, once they have that information in hand, if families provide it, they now have to store that securely. They have to be able to interpret that accurately. Yep. So they're not CPAs, they're early childhood professionals, and we're already dealing with challenges with them trying to interpret that, particularly for self-employed individuals. So there are some challenges to that again, will already they're dealing with the administrative burden of grant applications, and going through a universal process of applications for financial assistance would additionally increase that administrative cost significantly. I'm going to thank you for your time and see this time over to grandkids. Thank you very much, and I hope to be in touch with you all soon.
Okay.
I believe it was in this very room in January that you all asked Grand Beginnings to go and provide and curate all this information
Yeah.
for you all.
They did a good job.
So we're at the end of phase 1 here, and it's certainly not the end, but I want to thank you all for your time and look forward to further engagement on this.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
All right, I guess it's the grandkids show now. So since I already did my introduction, I will bring Bethany up to introduce herself too, real quick before.
Bethany Lashley, and I am the treasurer of Grandkids for almost 2 years now.
So I think you guys are fairly familiar, but just quick recap of who we are and what we've been doing. Like I said, I've been here since 2005 with Grandkids. It became Grandkids in 2004. So we've been operating. I started in the first building that we had, Wapiti Meadows, which we still have and operate. And then in 2018, we took over our second location, which is right behind us right now. And then in 2024, we opened our location in Granby. So now 3 sites. So we have daily capacity here in Fraser for 50 kids. We have 50 between here. And then if all of our classrooms are able to open in Granby, we would have 42 slots a day there. So that's, but then, I will toot our own horn right now. We just went through our Colorado Shines quality rating system. It is quite a comprehensive evaluation of our entire program, from evaluating coming in and seeing the teachers engage with the kids, what materials we have, but also like how we run our business, how we on the back end we engage with families, how we our policies, procedures. So we received the highest rating possible, a level 5, at all 3 locations. All 3 had to go through individually. So the paperwork on my side was a little daunting. So we will continue to celebrate that, and couldn't have done it without the support of our super highly qualified teachers, and I'm so grateful to have them. Typically, we operate with over 30 teachers in our organization, as we are now, but right now we are down to 25. We have 5 positions, 2 lead positions open currently right now. We actually just had to close our junior preschool room in Granby as of last week because our lead teacher took a position. If some of you heard me kind of give Merritt a little bit of a flack, she took a position at the county level that paid more and gave her better benefits. So you can't fault her for that, but did not have a qualified applicant at all. So we're bummed there. But as I already said, the 5 families turning down slots. So right now you have seen our current wage or our current tuition rate ranges. We do have 8 children currently that are on our Colorado Child Care Assistance Program, CCAP for short. So that is done through state funds and through our county level, that they have even more paperwork to do than what we require for our scholarship program. And then we have 11 children between all locations receiving universal pre-K, which is a across the board discount that there's minimal paperwork for them for that. That's coming, that's new, year 3, I think, for us, yeah. And then we only have 5 students on scholarship right now. That's where we turned in. So, but I will turn it over for I will start the clicker now and move on to some financial pieces.
Okay.
Okay, so what we have now is our 2026 budget that we have been working on. It is in progress, and it's not approved by our board yet. We usually do that in December, but this is a great starting point for us. For any of you who have been to our presentations over the last 2 years or talked to our directors or our board, these numbers and bottom line will probably look very familiar to you. Starting at the top here with our fundraising and grant income, we always keep this very minimal on our budget because these are never guaranteed for us. So some years we do really well, other years not very much. So this is the minimal amount, but what we feel good putting into that budget. Please keep in mind as we go into our further scenarios and pro formas, this does include $15,000 from Town of Fraser. So when we get specifically into St. Louis Landing and talking about what we would like to see contributed there, $15,000 is already in our budget. Tuition here, this is tuition rates as we currently have them. So we often increase tuition every year. We have not voted on that. So this is our tuition rates as they currently stand and what you've seen presented tonight. That opt-out discount that you see, that line item, corresponds with the holidays with East Grand School District. Those are the only options we give over Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's for our families to opt out and not pay tuition. We can head on down to expenses. Thank you. Highlighting just quick things, building expenses. We do pay property taxes. I've been told that's been a point of question in the past. So we do pay property taxes as a nonprofit. We do have our minimal repairs and maintenance that we put in there in order to just get by for our buildings. Rent, the majority of that is our Fraser Brown building. Please keep that in mind as well as we head into our scenarios, because that is a piece that is very helpful with us moving into St. Louis Landing, is that building and that rent piece that goes down significantly for us. I will jump all the way down to payroll. I mean, payroll is our biggest expense as we have been talking. We are a good 80 to 85% of our total expenses are payroll. And this is at status quo. So this is not hitting the living wage for that. So overall loss that we are looking at for 2026 is $266,990.
And Bethany, you guys typically do that just because it does help you with some grant leverage, and you guys typically you hope to make up most of that with grants and fundraising opportunities, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So typically you will budget in a deficit
Yes.
to really be able to leverage grant opportunities and different things, right?
That is part of it. And part of it is some years we have seen it as low as what we're looking at here. Other years we have done very well. And so we've had a chance to have a healthy bank account that when they then stretched it for a couple of years and covered that deficit based on what we have. All right, I'm going to skip well, let's not skip the first one. Okay. So we did a few projections here with adjustments for that living wage expense. So our loss would go to 570,754 if we were able to get our current staff all to the livable wage, which was the $24.75 per hour. Do you want to talk about your tuition number really quick, or? Oh, okay. Just getting the increased tuition.
So, yeah, so if you guys do go back to the one pager, you can see, here, I'll go back. What would be if we were to increase tuition to cover a living wage, we would have to raise our infant tuition to $140 a day. That's a $50 increase from where they're at, well, $49. So, and then toddlers, it goes down by $5 per classroom, but overall you can see that what that difference would mean to a family with just one child enrolled at full time rate. So those were where those projection numbers came from. So.
Okay, now let's skip to our last comparison chart for time's sake here. So you might have to zoom in on this if you have it on your computer, revisit it a little bit later, but I just wanted to walk through and make sure that everyone understood what we are presenting here so that you can reflect appropriately when it's time. Maybe I just lost it. Popped it up to the top. Okay. All right. So for the first chart of the four, this is a pro forma that starts with our 2026 budget that we just discussed and moves through 2031. This is for all three of our current locations, and then taking in 2027 and moving our Brown building, so that's home to our infant, toddler, and junior preschool classrooms, and moving them to St. Louis Landing. So that includes approximate build out for St. Louis Landing, the transition with our Brown building, because our goal would be to not have interruption of care. And we have a good 90 to 180 days going through licensing where we'll have to have the building set up before we can even move kids in there. So we will have an overlap with our rents, but that all takes that into account for that 2027 columns there. And then we move on through 2031. So this is essentially just keeping our same capacity that we have now, moving 24 kids to St. Louis Landing and being done with our Brown building location. Going to the second chart, this is the impact we would potentially see just for St. Louis Landing. So we did a per child allocation for revenue and expenses in order to see like what would that building itself potentially cost. Please keep in mind that, you know, although we broke this out this way, we have to still operate as a whole organization. So if you were just a building on its own, it would actually cost way more than what we are showing here at the moment. And then the third chart, this is actually showing a ramp up to a full 48 kid capacity at St. Louis Landing. So 2026 and 2027 look the same as the previous charts, and then we slowly increase the number of kids, opening new classrooms in 2028 in order to, by 2030, hit our full capacity. And be able to serve a total of 110 kids across all of our locations. That fourth chart then shows that same impact for St. Louis Landing and doing our per child allocations again in order to see what that difference would be for just St. Louis Landing. So happy to hit some specific numbers here too, but I know you also have 6 minutes left, so I want to make sure I hit what you guys need.
I thought St. Louis Landing could hold 75 kids.
It can, total. So
Okay.
the ask from Michael was to go up to doubling that 0 to 3, which is where our biggest need in the county is right now. And so 24 of our 0 to 3 right now is in the Brown building. And so doubling that would be the 48. And that was the priority for that first ask on doubling that, because they would be, again, they hold 70% of our own wait list right now, that 0 to 3. And then we have the least amount of slots in the county for those spots.
So I think the goal is we get the 24 transferred from Wapiti Meadows to St. Louis Landing, make sure that that's a sustainable operation. They do the interior build out, that all gets done. And then they look at scaling up and hiring new teachers to take on new classrooms and scaling up to that 48 kids. Let's see how that cash flows for a little while, see if we have support from the county. If we get a lot of support locally, maybe we can ramp this up faster. But just want to show what it looked like going from 24 and then to 48, because there is going to be training new teachers, hiring new teachers, getting those new classrooms going. And then maybe once you get to 48, we can make the decision, the town can make the decision as far as, okay, we're ready to go to the full capacity, hire more teachers, and just build a good foundation for it. Because I worry if you go straight to 75, you know, we could be subject to massive subsidies if there's not a lack of participation in the rest of the county. So we kind of scale it up as it makes sense and just kind of be, I was thinking more of a conservative approach with it.
And as Grand Kids has learned, since the Granby location came unexpectedly to us, it is not an easy feat to have a whole nother location and build up. And we are still, we're approaching, over a year and a half now in that program, and we still aren't at full capacity there because we haven't been able to hire and retain the quality teachers to open all the classrooms in that building. So want to be very realistic with the challenges that we're facing right now with hiring and retaining quality teachers.
Well, we could absolutely like add another piece to this for the next conversation that shows the scale up to like a full 75 and what that timeline might look like for you guys as far as being able to, realistically hire teachers, train them up and get them in those positions.
So I understand that even reaching 110 kids, there'll be a loss per child on services provided. Does it at least go down? I mean, this just shows numbers going up. And I'm looking back at slide number 11 from the EPIC presentation that shows the subsidy amount per child. Does that decrease even though the red line is going up? I'm just thinking about the trend. Is it making a difference or are we exacerbating a problem?
As we're scaling up and being able to reach more capacity and have those kids, yes, that trend is going down. That loss does become less.
The subsidy per child becomes less.
Yes.
Do you have an idea or is there any projections on that? Or because this just seems like we're making the problem worse.
So I mean, overall, I don't have it per child here, but if we were just at those 48 kids, so scaling to the 48 kids, looking at 2031.
There is an economy of scale.
So, yeah, it certainly is looking significantly better.
Yeah, Adam,
that
as an
stuff.
example, if you look at 2031, just looking at the St. Louis Landing 24 kid scenario, it would require with living wages a subsidy of 192,167. To go up to 48 kids, that subsidy in total goes up about 64,000.
So you're doubling the children and the subsidies going up.
So yes, the overall total number is more, but the
Yeah,
subsidy
no,
per child
I'm
is,
just,
yeah.
and I realize there's an economy of scale. It was like how it's being presented. I'd like to hear the good part of it as well.
The subsidy per child eventually decreases as you as you go up in numbers.
We're trying and yeah.
Yeah, we'll work on just adding an additional chart that shows the full scale up and see what that looks like as far as the bottom line impact goes. But something I just want to point out, if you look at the second chart here, where it shows just the 24 kids moving from Wapiti Meadows, St. Louis Landing, 2027 is, we anticipate that being open November 13th, 2026 I'm sorry, that's for building C. The Early Childhood Center would be February of 2027. So once that opens, if you look at that 105,244 number, that's there in the 2027 column. That's the kind of the difference between the status quo and the living wage, which, the total amount is that 175 number, but that doesn't take into account any success with, grant opportunity or, grant opportunities or fundraising opportunities. If you assume that grandkids can meet their status quo deficit, then you're really just looking at that line number difference between status quo and living. And I understand that will fluctuate based on success of, fundraising opportunities and grants. But as far as if the town's alone in all this, which I think is just a scenario you have to plan for, but we continue to push for more cooperation. 105,000 for 2027, 109,000 for 2028, and so forth. That makes sense?
I think Winter Park's gonna step up too.
Yeah.
I know we have like just a second left, but are there any other questions that you guys have? Thank you guys very much for this opportunity to be here today and
Thank
St.
you
Louis
for all that
Landing.
good work.
And yes, I always
Over it.
say this. You guys are welcome to come take a tour of Brain Kids, see what we're actually doing day to day, understand what the teachers put into their curriculum every day. And yeah, so just let me know because we're happy. Nap time's the only issue that teachers will get a little cranky about, but other than that, we're always an open door.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies.
Thanks. Okay. So we'll take a half-hour break here before we jump into the official Board of Trustees meeting. Thanks.